Tom, great to have you with us again. Thank you. We talk about a lot of weighty economic issues and problems in these conversations. Today will be no exception. We want to focus today on a number of really important federal entitlement programs that cover health care expenses and provide income security for tens of millions of people around the country. That includes Medicare, it includes Social Security. Many people, I think, recognize that these programs have been on an unsustainable fiscal path for a long time, but we're now at the point where they start going into the red in the near term, meaning like the next presidential term, and we want to get you to opine on that.
Well, I'm looking forward to the conversation, Arthur, because this is going to draw together quite specifically a number of things that we've talked about in some of our previous sessions about fiscal policy and the like, and it'll also grapple with the demographic evolution of the country.
Let's bring up a chart. This shows three of the major entitlement programs: Social Security Disability, Medicare Part A. All three of these programs run on what are called federal trust funds, which cover the gap between revenues and outlays for each of these programs. And as you can see, those balances of those trust funds go to zero at various times over the next several years. First question is, how aware do you think the general public is that this is happening now?
Well, I think the general public, a lot of people in this country, tens of millions, rely on these programs. So they know they rely on these programs. They take it on faith and confidence that the federal government has got them in a sustainable footing so that when they need them, if they need them now or in the future, like you and I will, that they will be there. And I don't think very many people spend a lot of time thinking about the sustainability of these trust funds or what their projections look like. So it's a long way of saying I don't think very many people realize that these things are not on long-term sustainable trajectories, and at some point, something's going to have to be done about that.
There was very little conversation about this in the recent elections, for instance.
Well, I follow the political process very carefully, as you know, and as people would expect me to. I don't remember hearing any candidate talk about this anywhere, at any time, in any debate, or in any other forum. And so I don't think there was any illumination put onto this issue. And what we're going to talk about, no doubt, is, when's that going to change?
Let's bring up a chart that shows some charts that show these programs in a little more specific detail. This one is Medicare Part A, which provides hospital services for people over 65. It's a multi-million-dollar program. Millions of Americans are covered with this. You can see on the left a chart that shows outlays and revenues, and there's a gap. And then again, the trust fund, which covers that gap, declines to zero in the very near future. When do you think the government and policymakers are going to start having to deal with this? And what are the solutions?
We could talk about just this all day long, but I think the reality is nobody's going to talk about any of this trust fund stuff until we get to the other side of COVID. And that's okay, right? We're in a once-in-a-100-year pandemic, and the economic consequences of that make these things pale in their materialities. And I think based on the projections for this trust fund, that will happen inside the zip code of the next president of the United States, who will be installed in January 2021. And this trust fund, for example, looks like it's going to go to zero before the next presidential election. So it will force attention of policymakers in the Congress and in the White House over the latter part of the next presidential administration, in my judgment.
What are the options for the government to address this?
Well, none of them are simple or easy because what we're dealing with here are some significant long-term trends. Number one, the inevitable ratcheting up of healthcare expenditures, which is a process that's been going on for several generations and seems very, very difficult to restrain. And number two is demography, right? Something like 10,000 Americans per day hit the 65, retirement threshold and go into eligibility for this and other types of retirement benefits. So those two irresistible forces are really driving that outlay problem, right? And the restraint of spending will therefore be a real challenge. My view of this, as in the others that we'll discuss, is inevitably the right answer is going to be unpleasant, but it's also going to involve a combination of constraints on expenditure growth and revenue in order to put the program on a sustainable long-term trajectory.
Let's bring up the next chart, which is similar. It shows the main Social Security program. This is a $1 trillion program, covers 60 million-ish retirees, and that number, as you just said, is going higher. Not as quickly as Medicare Part A, but this trust fund is declining to zero over the next several years. When are people going to in government going to deal with this?
This one has a longer, slower burning fuse on it. As you can see, that's a 10-year trajectory. We don't go to zero till about 10 years from now. I've been a particularly keen watcher of this because it goes to zero around the time I hit 65 and would be myself eligible for Social Security benefits, along with a great many other people. So this is one where the political system has been kicking this can down the road for a long time, still has a little bit of time to continue to do so, and therefore I don't expect this to be addressed with the same degree of urgency for example, the next presidential administration, unless they decide to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, which is rarely what happens in our politics, unfortunately.
Last chart that we'll bring up shows Medicaid. Medicaid doesn't run using a trust fund, but it's an entitlement program. It covers, 75 million people, 30 million of them are children, for healthcare services. Again, the expenses going up and contributing to this problem.
Well, it goes back to what I said a couple of minutes ago. This one is being driven by two irresistible forces. The aging of the population, so our fundamental demographics, which are not changeable, right? And number two, the irresistible price inflation in the costs of the medical platform that we have in this country, which, as everyone knows, as a percentage of GDP is the most expensive in the industrialized world, and has been growing inevitably, year over year over year over year. So this, sadly, is going to be a very difficult one to grapple with.
How tempted do you think policymakers will be to not solve this? Since we're already spending way more than we take in revenues at the federal level, do you expect that policymakers may simply opt to deficit spend at a higher level rather than grapple with these tough problems?
Well, if the past is prologue, which it usually is, and if we look at, as we have in our conversations in recent weeks and months, a set of prevailing laws which have, unless changed, locked in trillion-dollar budget deficits for the next 10 years and will drive up the debt obligations of the federal government of the United States to unprecedentedly high levels, that's what we're set to do if we do nothing. So it's fully my expectation that that's the trajectory we're on, unless or until something motivates the Congress, whoever controls those chambers, and the White House to come together on a much bigger basis to grapple with the fiscal dynamics of the entire federal government, including things like Medicaid, because that structural problem and differential between the legislation and the tax regime that we have versus the obligations that we have is just clearly unsustainable. I remember a couple of years ago we had a customer event, and one of the speakers was Robert Gates, who used to be the Secretary of Defense of the United States, been in public service almost his entire life, and he jokingly made a comment to a bunch of our customers and me that, well, the federal government of the United States is basically a giant insurance company with an army. And there's some truth to that because a vast chunk of the federal budget is basically insurance products, real and synthetically delivered to the population to mitigate their risks, health risks, crop insurance risks, you name it, lots and lots of risks. And most of those things are what we call entitlement programs. They don't have to be reauthorized or reappropriated every year. We legislated them decades ago, and we just keep writing checks forever. And they just keep getting bigger and taking a bigger and bigger slice of the revenue pie. And that problem is just going to continue to get tougher and tougher and tougher. And eventually it will have to be grappled with by the Congress and the executive branch.
Final question. We started with the concept of trust funds and the word trust. And this isn't meant to be political, but if part of the solution is going back out to the tax-paying public and saying we need more money, do you think they will trust policymakers to actually address this, given how long this problem's been going on and how bad it's gotten?
Difficult question to answer, but I think, it's fair to say that the trust quotient between the tax-paying population of our country and the people that govern us, either at the state level, but particularly at the federal level, is unfortunately at a very low level by any historical measure. And that's a real problem, right? Because we have a democratic republic and our government rests on the will of the people and the consent of the governed. And they will not consent and they will not be supportive of meaningful policy changes from whichever side of the political continuum they emanate, unless they have some confidence and some trust that that the leaders that they have selected are doing the right kinds of things for the right kinds of reasons in the right kinds of ways. One of the things that we all can do, me as a leader, CoBank as an institution that can provide leadership in the mission and the customers and the industries that we can serve, is to provide leadership by example and act with integrity, do the right thing at the right time in the right way for the right reasons. Always explain those reasons, because you can get people to come along and do difficult and complicated things, but they won't do it if you're not transparent about what those reasons are. We all make difficult, challenging, forward-thinking decisions in our personal lives. We all make them in our business lives. We need to be able to make them as a country in our national life because we all need each other so much. Rural America and urban America don't live in isolation. They require each other to be prosperous and successful, and we need the country to be able to act in concert to handle some of these big challenges.
Tom, great to talk to you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Arthur. It's a pleasure.